The vote was already over. I knew it before I walked through the doors of the Grand Convocation Chamber. The Vrelkai delegation sat perfectly still, which meant they felt guilty. The architect representatives were already organizing their data tablets, which meant they considered the matter closed. And Ambassador Thesson of the Quorum stood at the central podium with the calm, composed expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment for years. She had. My name is Joran Kaz. I was, until about 4 minutes ago, humanity's last diplomatic representative on Ethon Prime Station. I say was because the moment I heard Thesson begin reading the Forsaken Human Decree aloud, I understood that the title no longer applied. The chamber held nearly 3,000 delegates from 200 species. Every seat was full. Most of them could not look at me. A few could, and those were the ones who had voted for the decree without hesitation. Thesson read clearly and without emotion. The Forsaken Human Clause had been discussed, debated, and revised over the course of 60 years of galactic politics. It stripped humanity of observer status within the Council. It revoked our trade protections. It suspended all communication rights through Council-managed relay networks. And it terminated our membership in the Shield Pact, the mutual defense agreement that bound every Council species together under a promise of collective protection. She finished reading. The chamber was silent. I sat down slowly in my chair, placed both hands on the table in front of me, and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The ceiling of the Grand Convocation Chamber was made of something the architects called living glass. It shifted color based on the emotional output of the species present. Right now it was a deep, bruised violet, which the Council's cultural notes described as collective unease. Good, they should feel uneasy. The Quorum's stated reasons were well documented. Humanity had broken 17 minor trade accords over the past century, mostly involving FTL route boundaries. We had argued publicly and loudly with the Architect Assembly over resource allocation in the outer sectors. We had refused, repeatedly and without apology, to surrender the details of our faster-than-light drive technology to the Council's Open Science Registry. The real reason was simpler. We made them nervous. Humans had been part of the galactic community for just under 90 years, and in that time we had expanded faster, adapted faster, and argued louder than any species anyone could remember. We were not easy to manage. We were not easy to predict. And we had never once told the Council what we were actually doing out in the Veil. Thesson finished speaking. She looked at me directly for the first time. There was something in her expression that was almost apologetic, but not quite, not enough. I raised one hand. She acknowledged me. I have one question, I said. The chamber was completely still. Do you know what we have been doing in the Veil? Thesson held my gaze for a moment. The Veil is an electromagnetic dead zone on the outer rim. Humanity has maintained research stations there. The Council has no jurisdiction. That was not my question, I said quietly. Another silence, longer this time. She did not answer. No one answered. I nodded once. I picked up my credentials from the table, the physical documents that identified me as a representative of the human species to the Galactic Council, and I placed them face down on the surface in front of me. I did not hand them to anyone. I did not make a speech. I simply stood, pushed my chair back, and walked toward the exit. I heard whispers beginning behind me as I reached the door. The living glass above shifted from violet to something murkier, something the cultural notes probably did not have a clean word for. I stepped out into the corridor and let the door close behind me. My personal communicator vibrated almost immediately. A message from Admiral Marin Voss, commander of the 7th Human Expeditionary Fleet. 3 words. We heard, understood. I typed back to pull back. Then I found a seat near a window that overlooked the docking ring and sat there for a while, watching ships come and go against the dark. The station was vast and beautiful and full of species who had just decided they did not need humanity anymore. I thought about the veil. I thought about what lived beyond it. I thought about 40 years of human crews working in silence, in the dark, in a region of space so electromagnetically hostile that even long-range sensors became unreliable. I thought about the listening stations, the relay buoys, the patrol routes that made no logical sense unless you knew what you were tracking. I thought about the faces of the people who had never come home from those rotations. I thought about how none of that was in any file the Council had ever seen. And I thought about how long it would take them to notice. 3 weeks, I estimated, maybe less. I was wrong. It would take 11 days. A young aide from the Vrelkai consulate found me near the window about an hour after the vote. She was nervous and trying not to show it. She handed me a formal document, the official processing of my departure clearance from Ethon Prime. Standard procedure. Get the human off the station quickly and cleanly before anyone has to have an uncomfortable conversation. I signed it without reading it. She hesitated before leaving. "Ambassador Kaz," she said very quietly. I looked at her. She did not finish whatever she had started to say. She just pressed her lips together and walked away. I did not blame her. There was nothing to say that would have helped. I booked passage on a civilian transport leaving for the inner systems that evening. I did not request a diplomatic ship. I did not issue any public statement. I packed the small bag I always kept ready in my quarters on the station, because in diplomacy you learn quickly that exits can happen without much warning. On the transport, I found a corner seat near the rear observation port and watched Ethon Prime shrink behind us as we accelerated away from the station. It was an impressive structure, a monument to what dozens of species could build together when they chose cooperation over competition. It gleamed in the light of the system's sun, and I felt, for the first time in many hours, something close to grief. Not for myself, not even for humanity's position. For them, because they had just made a decision that they believed was about politics and pride and resource control, and they had no idea, not even a small idea, that it was actually about survival. 40 years ago, when humanity first pushed deep enough into the veil to understand what waited beyond it, we made a choice. We did not bring the information to the Council. We did not ask for help. We assessed the situation, assessed ourselves, and quietly decided that this was our problem to handle. Not because we were arrogant, or maybe a little because we were arrogant, but mostly because we understood something about the thing in the dark that we were not sure anyone else would believe without seeing it, and seeing it tended to go badly. So we handled it. For 40 years, we handled it. And now the Galactic Council had formally, legally, and officially decided that humanity was not their problem anymore. I leaned my head back against the seat of that transport ship and closed my eyes. I hoped they had time to regret it. I was almost certain they would. 11 days was all it would take. The order reached Admiral Marin Voss at 3:40 in the morning station time. She was already awake. She had been awake since the preliminary vote tallies started coming in from Ethon Prime, sitting in the small command observation alcove off the main bridge of the HSS Endurance, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The Endurance was a heavy fleet carrier, thick-hulled and ugly in the way that ships designed for function rather than appearance tended to be. Marin had commanded her for 6 years, and thought she was the most honest-looking vessel in the entire human fleet. The message from Joran Kaz was brief: pull back. She read it twice, set down the cold coffee, and walked onto the bridge. The crew of the Endurance's night rotation was a skeleton team, fewer than 40 people managing the systems of a ship built for 300. They were professionals. They noticed the change in her posture immediately and straightened without being told. "Get me a fleet-wide channel," Marin said. The communications officer, A quiet young man named Oliver Crane had it open in under 4 seconds. He was good at his job. Marin looked at the display in front of her, the tactical map of the Vale and its surrounding sectors. Green markers indicated the positions of the 17 ships currently operating under her command. Relay stations, listening buoys, patrol beacons, all of it layered across a region of space roughly the size of a solar system, carefully maintained and completely invisible to anyone who did not have the encryption keys and the context to understand what they were seeing. 40 years of work, 40 years of silence. All units, this is Admiral Voss. We have received formal withdrawal authorization effective immediately. Begin quiet exit protocol. All relay assets to be recovered or deactivated. All station systems to be brought offline in sequence. Nothing leaves a signal. Nothing leaves a pattern. We do this clean. Acknowledge. 17 acknowledgments came back within 90 seconds. Marin turned to her executive officer, a tall woman named Caroline Briggs, who had appeared on the bridge within moments of the fleet-wide broadcast. Caroline had a talent for being present when she was needed without making it look like she had rushed. "How long for a full withdrawal?" Marin asked. Caroline had already been running the numbers. 18 to 22 days if we recover all assets, 12 to 14 if we deactivate and leave them dark. We leave nothing readable. Deactivate, purge, then pull the hardware where we can. Anything we cannot pull goes dark permanently. I do not want anyone reverse engineering our buoy network. Understood. Caroline paused. Chief Harlow is going to be upset about Relay Station Typhon. She spent 8 months on the last upgrade cycle. Chief Harlow can submit a formal complaint to the Galactic Council, Marin said. She will be in good company. Caroline almost smiled, almost. The withdrawal began within the hour. What followed was not a dramatic retreat. There were no speeches, no ceremonies, no final salutes to the dark beyond the Vale's edge. There was only the methodical, careful, professional work of dismantling 4 decades of infrastructure that had never officially existed. Chief Engineer Dana Harlow, as predicted, was deeply unhappy about Relay Station Typhon. Typhon was the largest human installation in the Vale, a fortress-class listening platform anchored at the edge of the electromagnetic dead zone, where sensor capability degraded rapidly, and human crews had learned, over years of painful experience, to rely more on pattern recognition and instinct than on their instruments. Harlow was a stout woman with short red hair and an opinion about everything related to engineering that she shared freely and without hesitation. She found Marin on the secondary observation deck 3 hours into the withdrawal, carrying a tablet loaded with numbers. "We are leaving 4 years of calibration data behind," Harlow said, without preamble or greeting. "We are leaving nothing behind," Marin said. "Wipe the calibration archives before you shut down the core." Harlow's expression went through several stages very quickly. "Do you know how long it took us to build those archives? 4 years. I just said 4 years. The acoustic mapping alone." "I know. If we ever come back out here." "We will rebuild," Marin said. "We are very good at rebuilding." Harlow looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked out the observation window at the darkness beyond the Vale's edge, and something moved across her face that was not quite fear, but was close to it. "Do you think they understand what they have done?" Harlow asked. She did not specify who they were. She did not need to. "No," Marin said. "How long?" Marin thought about the patrol data she had reviewed that morning. The Null had been testing the outer boundary with increasing frequency over the past 6 months. The pattern was subtle enough that a casual observer would not recognize it as deliberate. Marin had been watching it for 2 years. The Null were patient. They were always patient. But they were also relentless. "The Council's border colonies on the outer rim are not well defended," Marin said carefully. "Their patrol routes are predictable. Their formations are textbook." Harlow closed her eyes briefly. How long? Less than 2 weeks, maybe 10 days. Harlow opened her eyes. She looked back at the dark. And there is nothing we can do about that. We are following legal orders from our government in response to a legal action by the Galactic Council, Marin said. We are withdrawing from a region of space we are no longer authorized to operate in. Everything we are doing is correct. Harlow nodded slowly. I know it is. She tapped the tablet against her palm a few times. It still feels wrong. Yes, Marin agreed, it does. She did not say anything else because there was nothing else to say that was useful. Wrong and right were sometimes the same direction for a short while. The Council had made their choice. Humanity had made theirs. The consequences belonged to the universe now. The withdrawal continued. Over the next 9 days, Marin watched her tactical map change piece by piece. Green markers disappeared as stations went dark and ships pulled back. The buoy network, which had formed a loose but functional early warning perimeter across the Veil's edge, went silent relay by relay. The acoustic decoy systems, which had been running continuously for so long that the automated maintenance logs called them legacy infrastructure, were switched off and stripped of their signal cores. The Endurance herself was the last to leave. Marin stood on the bridge on the 10th morning and watched the final sensor sweep of the Veil's inner edge. Nothing anomalous on the readings, nothing visible, but the data patterns she had spent years learning to read were there, subtle and cold, like a current beneath still water. They were already moving differently, already exploring the new silence. Navigation, Marin said. Ready, Admiral. Take us home. The Endurance turned away from the Veil, and Marin watched the darkness recede behind them on the aft display. She kept watching it until the electromagnetic interference of the dead zone swallowed the last sensor return, and the display showed nothing at all. 11 hours later, a distress signal came from the Vrelkai colony of Caldera, a small settlement on the outer rim, about 12 light hours from the Veil's nearest edge. Oliver Crane picked it up on the long-range receiver and reported it without editorial comment, because he was professional, and that was his job. Marin read the signal header. She did not respond to it. She sat with it for a few moments in silence, and then she filed it in the communications log and returned to her coffee. The Council had a fleet, a good one by conventional standards. They would respond. What happened after that was not her decision to make, not anymore. She hoped someone in that Council fleet was paying very close attention to the pattern of what they found when they arrived. She doubted it, but she hoped. The following account is reconstructed from recovered diplomatic communications, Council internal records, and the personal testimony of Ambassador Thesson of the Quorum, provided to the Human Diplomatic Archive 14 months after the events described. Narration by Joran Kaz. I was sitting in a cafe on Callisto when the first reports started filtering through the civilian news networks. I had been there for 6 days, doing nothing more demanding than drinking coffee and watching Earth's cloud bands through the dome window. The cafe was small and warm, and served food from about 15 different cultural traditions, which struck me as a nice reminder of what cooperation looked like when it was chosen freely rather than mandated. The news headline was brief: Vrelkai colony signals lost, Council fleet dispatched. I read it once. I ordered another coffee. The Council's response to the Caldera distress signal was, by all accounts, fast and organized. Thesson authorized a response fleet within hours of the first signal loss, which was the correct decision, and I will say so plainly even now. She moved quickly and with authority, and the fleet she assembled was formidable by every metric the Council used to measure such things. They were flying clean formations, textbook positions, proper escalation protocols radioed ahead as they approached the colony. The kind of disciplined military response that looked, on any standard tactical display, like exactly what it was: a professional force operating exactly as designed. The Null had been watching professional forces operate exactly as designed for a very long time. The patrol ship arrived first and entered the outer sensor ring of Caldera. It did not respond after that. Then the second ship. Then nothing. The main fleet arrived to find the colony's buildings intact. The infrastructure was undamaged. The power grid was still running. There were no fires, no debris fields, no signs of a conventional conflict of any kind. 300,000 Vrelkai were gone. Theson's own account of the next several hours is difficult to read, not because it is dramatic, but because it is methodical. She describes the investigation process with the careful, precise language of someone who has spent a long time trying to make sense of something that does not make sense. The scans, the atmospheric tests, the search for biological traces. The review of the final moments of the communication logs from the patrol ship, which showed nothing unusual right up until the moment they showed nothing at all. No weapons signature. No energy discharge consistent with any known technology in the Council's database. No pattern of physical damage consistent with any attack model they had ever studied. The Council's senior tactical analysts had a term for what happened to Caldera. They called it a clean event. I learned this later from Thesan herself, and I remember thinking that it was the most clinical possible description of what was actually the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It was not the first clean event. It was the first one on the Council's side of the galaxy. Thesan called an emergency session within 24 hours. The chamber that had voted so cleanly and calmly to expel humanity 9 days earlier was a different place now. The living glass was no longer violet. I was told by someone who was present that it was cycling through colors that the cultural notation system did not have names for. The debate was long and fractured. The architect delegation proposed 17 separate theories, all of them technically coherent, and none of them correct. The Vrelkai Elder Council requested immediate reinforcement of all Outer Rim colonies. 3 smaller species delegations formally requested protection under clauses of the Shield Pact that had not been invoked in recorded history. Thesan sat through it all and kept coming back to the same problem. The thing that had taken Caldera was unknown, not poorly documented, not understudied, unknown. There was no entry in any council scientific registry, no historical account, no mythology, no warning from any species at any point in 90 years of shared galactic records. She had never heard of the Null. Nobody on that station had. She began sending messages. She contacted every xenobiologist, every deep space survey team, every Outer Rim research station the Council had access to. She reached out through every back channel she could find to former human contacts on Ethon Prime, colleagues and counterparts from years of diplomatic engagement. Most did not respond. A few responded with variations of the same message. We are sorry, but we are no longer authorized to share information through Council relay networks. She sent a message to my personal communicator through a third-party relay run by a small independent trading station that still maintained connections to both human space and Council space. It cost her something, politically, to use that channel. She used it anyway. The message read, "What are the Null? We have no record of them." I was still in the cafe on Callisto. I read the message. I sat with it for a while. I looked out at Earth's clouds and thought about Caldera, which I had never visited but had seen in survey files. Green hills, a coastal settlement, 300,000 people who had done nothing wrong and had no idea that the thing protecting them from the dark had just been voted away. I took a long sip of my coffee. Then I typed back, "No, you do not, because we never told you." I sent it. I finished my coffee. I booked a transport to a place called Waypoint Gale, a small neutral station that sat technically outside both human space and Council jurisdiction, maintained by a consortium of independent operators who made a modest living facilitating conversations that official channels could not accommodate. I had used Waypoint Gale twice before, in complicated diplomatic situations that I had not been authorized to discuss publicly. I suspected I would be there within the week. Theson's response came 4 hours later. It said only, "We need to talk." I replied, "I know." Then I packed my bag for the second time in 11 days, and I thought about what I would say when I sat across from the woman who had read the forsaken human decree aloud in front of 3,000 delegates, and what I would ask for, and how to ask for it in a way that made clear this was not revenge. Because it was not revenge, that was important. This was mathematics. This was the simple, unavoidable arithmetic of a galaxy that needed certain things done, and had just decided it did not want to pay the people doing them. The bill had arrived, as bills always do, faster than expected. I was going to Waypoint Gale to negotiate the terms of payment. The conference room at Waypoint Gale was designed for anonymity rather than comfort. The table was plain. The chairs were functional. The walls were a neutral gray that did not belong to any species aesthetic tradition, which was the point. It was a room that said, "No one is home here, so no one needs to be defended." I arrived first and sat with my back to the wall, which was a habit I had developed early in my career and had never managed to shed. Theson arrived 4 minutes later with 2 aides. The architect delegates came 6 minutes after that, 3 of them, moving in the careful synchronized way that architects tended to move in public spaces. The Vrelkai elder arrived last, alone, and sat directly across from me. Her name was Vila. She was very old, even by Vrelkai standards, which meant centuries in human terms. Her eyes were pale gold and completely steady. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Theson opened a document on her tablet and set it on the table between us. "We would like to propose a temporary information-sharing framework under a provisional." "No," I said. She stopped. "That is not what this meeting is," I said. "You did not come here to propose a framework. You came here because 300,000 people are gone, and you do not know why, and the people who know why are the ones you expelled 9 days ago." The room was very quiet. One of the architect delegates made a short clicking sound that their translation software rendered as a request for clarification. I ignored it. "I am going to explain to you what the null are," I said, "and then I am going to tell you what we can do about it, and then we are going to talk about what happens next, in that order. Is that acceptable?" Theson looked at the Vrelkai elder. The elder looked at me. "Speak," the elder said. So I spoke. "The null," I told them, "are not a species in any sense the Council's taxonomy recognizes. They do not have planets. They do not have ships, not in the physical sense. They are, as far as humanity has been able to determine after 40 years of study, entities that exist partially in normal space and partially in something adjacent to it that our physicists still argue about naming. They are old. Not old in the way civilizations are old. Old in the way geological formations are old. They feed, if that is even the right word, on complexity, on organized thought, on the kind of dense information that living minds generate. They do not destroy structures because structures are not interesting to them. They are not violent in any conventional sense. They are simply hungry in a way that has no malice in it and no mercy either. For 40 years, human crews operating in the Veil have maintained a perimeter that uses the null's own behavioral patterns against them. The null learn. They are exceptional at learning. They study patterns and respond to them with a precision that makes most tactical systems look primitive. They mapped every organized species' behavior within the first century of encountering them, and they learned how to move through those patterns the way water moves through gaps in stone. Humanity's advantage was never firepower. Our ships are not more powerful than the null. Our weapons do not damage them in ways that matter. What we had was something that the null, despite their intelligence, had never been able to fully model: the way humans make decisions. We are inconsistent. We are emotional. We change plans in the middle of executing them, for reasons that are not always rational. We name our tactics after concepts. We argue with each other mid-mission, and sometimes the argument changes the outcome in ways that improve it. We make mistakes that accidentally become strategies. We take risks that have no business working, and sometimes they work anyway. To the null, this is not bravado. It is noise. Deep, complex, unpredictable noise that their pattern recognition cannot fully process in real time. And in the gap between their recognition and their response, human crews have been operating for 4 decades. Not heroically, not glamorously, just persistently in the dark, in a region of space the Council never asked about and humanity never volunteered information on, because explaining it to species that fought in textbook formations and followed escalation protocols would have required explaining, first, that the textbook formations and escalation protocols were exactly what made them vulnerable. I stopped speaking. The room was very, very still. The elder's gold eyes had not moved from my face for the entire time I was talking. "How many?" she said. It was not fully a question. "At last count," I said, "there were approximately 40,000 distinct null entities that our survey teams had cataloged in and around the Veil. That number is a minimum. There are likely more that our sensors have not resolved clearly enough to count separately." Thesson set her tablet face down on the table. One of the architect delegates said something to the others in their own language. The translation software did not render it. I suspected it was not intended for me. I let the silence sit for a moment. It needed to breathe. Then I said, "I want to be clear about something. We are not here because we want to watch you fail. We are here because I contacted Joran Kaz, and Joran Kaz is a person who chooses, consistently, to try to solve problems rather than observe them. That is a human trait that apparently the Council found inconvenient enough to vote against." I paused. "He and I disagree about a number of things, but not about this." "What do you want?" Thesson asked. Her voice was flat and careful. "I want several things," I said. "And I want to be honest with you about all of them, because we do not have time for negotiating positions and counterproposals and framework documents." I leaned forward. "Humanity wants a permanent seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. Not observer status, not a provisional arrangement with review periods. A permanent seat. We want the Veil operations formally acknowledged in the Council's historical record, with full credit to every human crew that served there. We want the Shield Pact reinstated and amended to recognize that humanity has been a founding protector of this galaxy for 40 years, not a guest species that overstayed its welcome." I waited for the objections. Thesson started to speak. The elder's hand came down quietly on the edge of the table, not a gesture of interruption, just a presence, and Thesson stopped. The elder was quiet for a moment. Then she said to Thesson and not to me, "Accept." Thesson closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "The full council would need to." "The full council," the elder said patiently, "will do what is necessary when they understand what we have just heard. You know this." She turned to me. "We accept your terms, Ambassador Kaz, all of them." I looked at her for a moment. "There is one more thing," I said. "Speak." "The crews that go back into the Veil, the human crews, they are not going back as Council employees or under Council command structures. They operate under human authority, with human methods, according to human judgment. The Council can have observers aboard if it wants to understand what is being done out there, but no committee approves our tactics. No review board second-guesses our operational decisions." "You do not trust us," Thesson said. "I trust you to be exactly who you are," I said, "which is people who think in formations and protocols and frameworks. That is not an insult. It is important and it has value in most situations. It is simply not useful in the Veil. Another silence. Agreed, the elder said. I sat back. I thought about Marin Voss and the crews she commanded, and Dana Harlow and her calibration archives, and Oliver Crane and his communication station, and all the people whose names I knew and the many more whose names I did not, who had spent years in a region of space the galaxy did not know existed, doing a job the galaxy did not know needed doing. Then let's get to work, I said. The formal repeal of the Forsaken Human Decree was still being drafted when I boarded the military transport back toward the Veil. The legal team handling it told me the process would take a week. I told them to take however long they needed and sent a separate message to Marin Voss with one line: "We are cleared to return." Her response came back in under a minute. "Fleet is ready. We have been ready since we left." I smiled at that, which was not a thing I had expected to be doing on a military transport at 600 in the morning. The transport docked with the Endurance 6 days later. Marin Voss met me at the docking collar personally, which was not standard practice for an admiral meeting a civilian diplomat. It told me something about her mood. She was taller than I had expected from the video calls and shorter than the stories made her sound. She had gray at her temples and steady brown eyes, and the particular kind of stillness that some people develop after years of making decisions that could not be undone. We shook hands. "The council agreed to everything?" she asked. "Everything. Even the operational authority clause." "Even that?" She nodded once, the way people do when something they had not fully believed would happen has happened. "We have 4 council observers aboard, Vrelkai, 2 of them, an architect junior delegate, and a young woman from one of the smaller species. I cannot pronounce the name of her homeworld, but she is apparently a very good engineer." "How are they?" "Nervous," Marin said, "appropriately so." We walked toward the bridge. The Endurance was already underway. The crew had not waited for a formal departure ceremony, because Marin Voss was not the kind of commander who held departure ceremonies. The ship was moving, clean and steady, toward the Veil's edge, and the people on it were doing their jobs. I found the 4 council observers in the secondary observation room, which gave a clear forward view. The Vrelkai pair were standing at the window, very still. The architect delegate was reviewing something on a tablet with the focused expression of someone memorizing it. The young engineer, a slight woman with iridescent markings along her jaw that shifted color when she moved, was watching the tactical display with an expression of complete and undivided concentration. Her name, she told me later, was something untranslatable in standard, so she had been using the designation Lena for human interactions. She had excellent instincts and a mind that worked quickly, which I noted and filed away. The approach to the Veil took 18 hours from our position. As the electromagnetic interference began to build, the ship systems adapted in ways that were not standard. The sensor arrays shifted to a different operating mode, one that the crew had developed internally over years of Veil operations, that traded raw resolution for pattern sensitivity. The communication system switched over to a protocol that the Council's relay network did not recognize, because it had not been designed for the Council's relay network. The lights on the bridge dimmed slightly, because human eyes in the Veil had learned to rely less on instrument panels and more on direct observation, and lower ambient light made direct observation easier. Lena watched all of this and said nothing, but she was paying attention to everything. Marin gave the orders quietly and without ceremony. Systems came online in a sequence that had no tactical logic unless you understood the acoustic principles behind it, which required knowing things the Council's military theorists had not had access to. Every system activation was timed and patterned in a specific way, not for efficiency, but for effect, for the same reason that a hunter does not move in straight lines. The Null had been in the Veil for 11 days without the perimeter. The patrol data Marin's team had collected during the withdrawal showed they had moved fast, faster than historical patterns suggested they would. They learned the silence quickly, Marin told me at the tactical table, pointing at the data. See this boundary here? That is Relay 7's old position. They crossed it on day 3, and here day 6 they reached what used to be the acoustic decoy perimeter. They are not wandering, they are mapping. They know we left, I said. They knew before we finished leaving, Marin said. But they did not know why. They are not sure if we will return. They are being careful. That is different from their usual pattern. Yes, she said, it is. She looked at the display for a moment. I want to run a Hoffman spiral entry. I nodded. I knew what that was. The council observers did not. And Lena leaned forward. What is a Hoffman spiral? She asked. Marin glanced at her. It is a navigation pattern we borrowed from asteroid mining operations about 30 years ago. For mining, it makes sense because it is fuel efficient when you are working across multiple targets with different orbital velocities. For our purposes, it makes no strategic sense at all by conventional standards. A formation running a Hoffman spiral looks like it cannot decide where it is going. It looks like confusion. Lena's jaw markings shifted to a deeper color. And that is the point. That is entirely the point, Marin said. She gave the order. The Endurance adjusted course, and the 12 ships of the advance fleet adjusted with it, spreading into a pattern that no tactical school in the Council's records would have recognized as intentional. From outside, from any observer trying to model the fleet's behavior, it looked like a convoy that had experienced a navigation error and was trying to correct it, unsuccessfully. The null responded exactly as the data predicted they would. On the long-range acoustic sensors, the patterns that indicated null presence, the deep, complex signatures that human crews had spent decades learning to read, began to shift. The leading edge of their expansion, which had been moving steadily outward, faltered, not because the fleet was threatening them, because the fleet was doing something that did not parse. There, said Oliver Crane at his station. He highlighted a cluster on the display. They are holding position. They have stopped advancing. Give them 60 seconds, Marin said. 60 seconds, 90. The signatures retreated. Not fast, not in panic. Slowly, carefully, the way a cautious intelligence withdraws from something it does not understand. They did not flee the fleet. They moved away from the pattern, from the noise of it. Lena was gripping the edge of the display console with both hands, not from fear, from the effort of not saying something before she had finished thinking it. They are retreating, she said finally. Pulling back, Marin said. There is a difference. They will return, but they will take time to study what they saw, and by the time they come back, we will have the perimeter rebuilt and the acoustic decoys back online, and the pattern will be different again. You never let them learn the same thing twice, Lena said. We try not to, Marin said. It is a lot of work. The fleet continued its entry into the veil. The null signatures pulled further back toward the deep dark at the galaxy's edge, retreating past Relay 7, past the boundary they had crossed on day 3, pulling back toward a distance that the human sensors could track but not quite resolve clearly. Dana Harlow's voice came over the internal comm from the engineering section. Typhon station structure is intact. All systems show cold standby. I can have the core back online in 6 hours. 4 hours, Marin said. A pause, Admiral. I know, Chief, 4 hours. Another pause. Yes, Admiral. I walked to the forward observation window and looked out at the veil. The electromagnetic interference gave the dark a strange quality, a faint shimmer at the edges of perception, the kind of visual artifact that took new arrivals weeks to stop noticing and veterans years to stop finding beautiful. Lena appeared beside me after a moment, standing very straight, watching the same dark I was watching. You have been doing this for 40 years, she said, It was not a question. 42, I said, give or take. She was quiet for a while. Why did you never tell anyone? She asked. I thought about that. It was not the first time I had thought about it, but standing in the veil, looking at the dark where the null had just pulled back from, it felt different than it had in the cafe on Callisto. We tried early on, I said. The first time we brought preliminary data to the council, about 3 years after we understood what we were looking at, the response was a proposal to form a joint observation committee, with a 6-month formation timeline, and a review board for the committee. I paused. And a subcommittee to define the terms of reference for the review board. Lena's markings shifted color. We did not have that kind of time, I said. So we went back to the Veil and handled it ourselves. And then the years kept passing and the work kept working, and it became easier to keep doing what was working than to go back and explain why we had never reported it formally. She was quiet for a moment. That must have been very lonely. I looked at her. She was young. By her species standards, I was told later, she was the equivalent of about 23 years old in human terms. And she had understood something in about 4 hours aboard the Endurance that had taken the Council's senior leadership 11 days, a missing colony, and a crisis negotiation to grasp. It was, I said, yes. She nodded. She went back to watching the dark. Behind us, the bridge was steady and focused, full of people who had been doing this work for years in silence, rebuilding the perimeter one system at a time, relaying the buoys and calibrating the decoys and logging the patrol patterns with the quiet professionalism of a crew that understood exactly what they were protecting and had never needed anyone to thank them for it. Harlow's voice came back at the 4-hour mark. Typhon Core was online. Marin walked to the center of the bridge and looked at the tactical display. The perimeter markers were coming back one by one, green lights returning to a map that had been dark for 11 days. It would take weeks to fully rebuild what had been dismantled, months to recalibrate the acoustic network, years, maybe, to recover some of the signal data that had been wiped from Typhon's archives before the shutdown. But the perimeter was there, thin and incomplete and not yet what it had been, but real and lit, and ours again. Fleet status, Marin said. Oliver Crane ran through it. All 17 ships on station. Relay 7 back online. First acoustic decoy array reactivated. Sensor coverage at 40% and climbing. Marin nodded. She did not make a speech. There was no announcement to the crew, no declaration, no moment designed for history. She just looked at the display for a few seconds, the way a person looks at something they are relieved to see again, and then she said, quietly, "Good, let's get to work." And we did. Weeks later, I was in Joran's office when the official notification came through that the Forsaken Human Decree had been formally and permanently repealed, and that the amendment to the Council Charter recognizing humanity as a founding protector species had passed with a larger majority than the original decree had received. He read the notification once, filed it, poured himself a coffee. "How do you feel?" I asked him. He thought about it for a moment. "Like we have a lot of rebuilding to do," he said. He was right. We did. And we had already started.